Hello everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of An American in Thailand, airing every Friday. This program is broadcast to you from Ratchamakan, University of Technology, Peranakan, and this program will come to you in two parts. For the first part of the program, I will introduce a certain topic about being an American living here in Thailand. It could be about food, travel, culture, many different things. We'll then take a break, and in the second part of our program, we will get into more examples and more specifics of whatever the topic is we're talking about. Then we'll have the news and the latest updates from the university as always. Hello everyone, my name is Gary Gray, and I am your host for An American in Thailand. I am an English teacher here at Ratchamakan, University of Technology, Peranakan, and I have been living here for just over 8 years. I just had my 8th anniversary not long before I'm recording this program. So I've been here about 8 years, and I think that's long enough for me to have some pretty good idea on the culture and the general atmosphere of Thailand, what it's like to be here in Thailand. Sometimes just as a visitor, we don't really get that. If you're a tourist, maybe you just visit some touristy areas and then you go back home. And you're not here a long time. Also, just because of the cost of living difference, a tourist coming here might be able to eat more expensive foods and things like that. More so than someone from Thailand that's living here would be able to do. So, it's much different living in a place than visiting it. And so for today's episode, what we're going to talk about is the weather. The weather. That seems kind of boring, right? Well, I think you might find it interesting, especially if you're not too familiar with the weather back in America. Because we're going to compare the two a little bit. We're going to compare the weather here in Thailand to the weather in America. And I'm going to give you my own kind of experience on that as well, as far as how I have experienced it. So you may think, can we really do an episode just about the weather? Yeah, I think we can. Because I think our weather is very complicated and it's very different. And I think some of the differences you might find surprising. Some of the things I'm going to tell you about American weather may surprise you. I'm also going to explain some things about Thai weather that even though most of you listening to this are probably from Thailand, might not even know. Back in America, my job was actually as a scientist, and I was a weather scientist. So I've had to study all of these things, and so I have some knowledge about why certain things in weather happen. So I will actually even explain a few things to you about the Thai weather. So when we think about Thailand, we mostly think about the weather just being hot. Yeah, just hot. And when we think about the U.S., we think about it either as being pleasant to warm, maybe a little hot, especially in the southern areas like California or Florida. And then you think about up north, it's cold. You know, you see pictures, movies, whatever, especially in the winter time, and you see they get snow, things like that. So it's cold. Cold in the north. But it is much more complicated than that. And I will say that not just in America, even here in Thailand, I think the weather varies more than I expected. That was one of my experiences as an American here in Thailand. For example, one of the things that surprised me about Thailand is that it can actually get kind of cool. It can actually get quite chilly, especially in the north of Thailand. I've mentioned this on this program a couple of times. I was in Nong Khai for New Year's Eve. This would have probably been in 2018 to 2019, I think. So I think it was New Year's Eve 2018, so the new year would have been 2019. And the temperature in the morning was about 5 degrees Celsius. That's cold. That's cold for Thailand. 5 degrees. So it can actually get pretty cold. And the reason I say that's surprising, I mean, you may think, well, that's not so surprising, right? I mean, Thailand is kind of a small country, but it's narrow, stretches north to south a lot. You know, the further north you go, the colder it gets. This was in the north. It was in Nong Khai. Not that surprising. Actually, it really is. The furthest north point in Thailand is still inside what is considered the tropics. So all of Thailand is tropical. So 5 degrees in Thailand is cold. And that's not even the coldest it's ever been. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the second part of our program. That's just the coldest weather I've experienced since I've been here. And it was 5 degrees in Nong Khai. Another thing I was surprised about here in Thailand is that we do get tornadoes. Now, we don't get them very often. And there's a reason for that. The weather is not very conducive. In other words, it doesn't help create tornadoes, which is a good thing. You don't want tornadoes. They're very destructive. But they can happen. I will tell you, again, using my background as a scientist, why they're not very common here. Usually, you want to get a good temperature gradient. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's helpful. Because temperature gradient actually creates wind, and that can create something called wind shear, which is helpful for causing the circulation that can create a tornado. So it's very complicated science, but basically a temperature difference across an area helps. Well, we don't normally get that here in Thailand. And when we do, it's like the cold day that I just mentioned to you, like New Year's Eve. It's usually around late December, early January. You get a few days in the north where it can get kind of cold. Here's the problem. That's the dry season. So there's not usually a lot of moisture around. So you're not going to get a lot of thunderstorms to create those tornadoes. So tornadoes are quite rare here in Thailand, but I was actually surprised that they happened at all. Because even though I was a weather scientist, it's not like I studied all of the weather in Thailand. So before I moved here, I actually looked that up. I was like, I know they get a lot of rain because we're in a tropical area. We have our monsoon season, which as I record this, we're in now. But I never really hear about tornadoes. So do they get tornadoes? And I actually looked it up, and the website I went to said that they don't. Said that Thailand does not get tornadoes. That is completely false. There have been several tornadoes in Thailand just since I've lived here. Now, most of them have been small. Most of them are weak. They don't occur very often. You might get a report of 1 or 2 of them a year. So there's usually not a lot of damage caused by them. But they do happen. They do happen. So we can get tornadoes here in Thailand. Another thing that surprised me here was the rainy season being very variable. What do I mean by variable? I mean sometimes it's extremely rainy. Sometimes it's not actually very rainy at all, even though it's the rainy season. Now, I am kind of familiar with that because we have related, seasonal variations in America. A lot of times caused by something called El Nino or La Nina, which I think is probably the same thing causing a change in the monsoon over here as well. I think it's probably the same effect. But, being in the tropics, I would think it would tend to be a little bit more regular. You just don't have that same variation in weather just overall, which, again, we're going to talk about a little more in our second half. So I figured rainy season is pretty much always going to be rainy. Sure, of course there's going to be some differences each year. A little less rain that year, a little more rain that year. But the difference can be huge. The very first year I moved here, we had heavy rain during the rainy season almost every day. Almost every day. And I don't think it was that same year, but one of the first years I moved here, I remember having to walk home because you couldn't get a taxi. The traffic was not moving because the roads were flooded. So I had to walk home from my university. And some of the roads I was walking down, I was up to my knees in water. And I'm not that tall, but I'm also not that short. And it's my legs that make me not so short. My legs are kind of long. The top part of my body is a little bit short. It's not that short. I don't look weird or anything. Like a really short top and a very long legs, but my legs are definitely a little bit longer than you might expect given my height. So my knees are up pretty high. Again, I'm not really that tall. I'm not even 6 feet tall, but my body proportions are a little bit more in the legs. So my knees are pretty high. I was walking home up to my knees in water. And then we went several years in a row, like 2 or 3 years, where it was not very rainy at all during rainy season. One of the years was very weird because it was extremely rainy pretty much all around me. And I would watch the storms move past. You can find that online, by the way, if you look up Bangkok, if you're in the Bangkok area, although they do have this for other parts of the country. So you can search it based on Thailand, but if you look up online weather radar, you will find that online. The Thai Meteorological Department, TMD, does put the weather radar online, and that will show you the storms, where they are, where they're moving. It's very difficult to predict where thunderstorms are going to form and move at any given time. That's why a lot of people complain about the weather forecasts in Thailand not being very good. You know what? If I was doing forecasting here, I wouldn't be very good either. It's almost impossible to do. It's almost impossible to figure out where exactly a storm is going to form and where it's going to move. And in fact, half the time they'll say there's almost a 100% chance of rain, and I don't see rain. Other days they'll say there's a 20% chance of rain, and it'll rain at where I am. It's just very hard to predict. So one of those seasons, it was raining all around me. I would load up the weather radar online, and I could see these rainstorms moving past my north, my south, my east, my west, and it just kept missing me. But there was another rainy season as well, and I think this was just a couple of years ago, where the entire last 2 months of the rainy season, I did not see one single day of rain. Not one. None. Zero rain. None. For 2 months of the rainy season. So that's kind of surprising. That's one of the things that surprised me, is how much the rainy season can vary here in Thailand. Another thing that surprised me a little, I kind of expected this because, again, my background in weather science, I kind of knew this when I came here, but still surprises me a little bit, is that you basically don't ever get any tropical cyclones here. Sometimes you'll hear about one coming, but it's usually just what's left over from the storm after it moves through Vietnam and Cambodia and then moves into here. I kind of expected that because there's a reason for it. Storms, they like to spin. They spin, 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 spin. Well, what causes that spin is the rotation of the Earth. I know that seems confusing. I'm not going to explain all the science to it behind all of the science that goes into that. It's something called the Coriolis effect. Whatever. And storms, when they're north of the equator, spin one way. When they're south of the equator, they spin the other way. So when you're right at the equator, you can't get a storm because it can't spin. And so that's going to be true even if you're really, really close to the equator. And so this is why it's very difficult for Thailand to get tropical cyclones. Most tropical cyclones are going to move from the east to the west. So, in order to get a direct hit into Thailand for a tropical cyclone, it has to come south of Vietnam and Cambodia and then come up into Thailand. That is very hard to do. The southern coast of Vietnam and Cambodia is almost too far south to maintain a storm. I say almost. It has happened. It can happen. And if that storm turns at just the perfect time, it could even come up the Gulf of Thailand and hit Bangkok directly. It's actually never happened. It's so difficult for that to occur, it's never happened. We have had a couple that have turned a little bit, and so maybe they come up and go across into the area around Pattaya or something like that. There have also been a few, not many, but a few that will move in the wrong direction. So they come out of the Indian Ocean, like east of India, south of, way off the coast, way south of Bangladesh, and maybe move into Thailand that way, from the west, they move in from the west to the east. That's not common either, which is why that hasn't happened very often. So yeah, we basically get no tropical cyclones here, which didn't, like I said, didn't surprise me a lot because I kind of knew that, but it still surprised me a little bit just how few there had been. There have been a few, so I shouldn't say we don't get any at all anywhere in Thailand. There are some occasionally, but they're very uncommon. All right, and what might surprise you about U.S. weather? Well, one thing that may surprise you is that in the peak of the summer, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in our second half, it can get hotter than it gets here in Thailand. Even up north. All of those areas that you think of in America are cold, like maybe New York, or if you know the geography well, maybe you think maybe Minnesota or Wisconsin or Michigan. That's kind of in the middle, north part of America, right near the Canadian border. It can actually get hotter than Thailand. The temperature swings can also be huge. We can go from hot to cold or cold to hot very quickly. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit more in the second part of the program. That's more likely to happen at certain times of year. For example, if it's the middle of the summer and you're in the south, it's not going to get cold. You could cool off a little bit if a weak cold front manages to get down that far south. But if it's the middle of the summer and you're in Texas or Florida, you're not going to see cold weather. So I don't mean to make it sound like, oh, anytime, any day, it could be any temperature. No. In the winter, it's mostly cold. In the summer, it's mostly hot. Yeah. But things can happen that can cause some crazy weather changes in America. We also have many different types of storms. Those tornadoes I mentioned that you don't get too many of, America gets, I believe, more tornadoes than any other country in the world. I'm almost certain that's right. And of course, with those same types of storms, you can also get hail and wind with them. We also get lots of those tropical cyclones that we talked about, which in America we call hurricanes. They're going to be almost exclusively on the East Coast. because that part of the Pacific Ocean is a little too cold because of the way the ocean circulation is. There have been one or two kind of dying storms that have managed to make it up into Southern California, but almost all of these hurricanes are going to be on the East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico area. Gulf of Mexico, that's that area north of Mexico, the water there where Florida and Texas are on. So we get those type of storms. We can get winter storms, which are crazy. I lived in the Northeast U.S., which is where we would see some of the worst ones. I've seen a storm where we got over 3 feet of snow. We use feet and inches in America, but that would be about 1 meter. A little over 3 feet is about 1 meter. We got 1 meter of snow. Think about that. A meter of snow on the ground. That's probably impossible for someone from Thailand to even imagine, unless you've been skiing somewhere in Japan or something like that, and maybe there's really a lot of snow there. If you've done something like that, or you've traveled to Europe or something, it's hard to even imagine that. But yes, we get crazy winter storms, and a storm that's that strong will usually come with a lot of wind as well, so the snow will be blowing around. It'll be crazy. We also get something called an ice storm, and that's when the cold air is only at the lowest level, like cold enough so that maybe it would snow otherwise, but it's only right at the bottom. So the cloud, which is higher up, is raining, and then it gets to that bottom layer, and the rain hits the ground and freezes right away. And those can be very damaging, because if they start getting frozen on trees and things like that, they can start breaking the tree limbs. They will land on power lines, and people can lose power and all kinds of bad things. Or the tree can fall on a house or a car, or it can get crazy when that happens. So we also get that. Those are a little more common up into Canada. In fact, just about 10 or 15 years ago, there was just a wild ice storm in Canada. But we do get plenty of them in the United States as well. All right, so we're going to talk about this a little bit more detail in our second half. So let's go ahead and take our first break right now. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so we're talking about some of the weather differences between Thailand and the U.S., and I'm especially focusing on things that kind of surprised me when I moved to Thailand, or things that might surprise you about American weather, which is what I was used to. Because after all, this is about an American in Thailand, so I'm kind of trying to relate these differences to my experiences. So one of the things I did want to bring up is like more examples of some of the stuff we discussed in part one. Like I mentioned to you, for example, the hottest weather. It actually gets hotter in America, which may seem crazy to you. How can it get hotter in America? Thailand is in the tropics. There is nowhere in America that's in the tropics. The southern tip of Florida gets pretty close, but it's not there. America is not tropical. Thailand is. How does America get hotter? Actually, there is a reason. It's related to, there are two factors going on. Number one, it's the moisture in the air. It's so humid here. It takes a lot longer to heat up water. So all that water that's in the air, that humidity, it's really hard to heat up Thailand. Oh, I'm not saying Thailand's not hot. Oh, we get plenty of heat here. But it's hard to really push it. up to like extreme levels. The second reason is because of what happens in the summer, like with the angle of the sun, it affects how long the days are. And so the days last a lot longer in America than they do in Thailand. Now, I don't mean the whole day. Obviously, it's 24 hours. I mean the sunlight part of the day. So the sun is out a lot longer in America in the summer. Here in Thailand, it's basically 12 hours, 12 hours, 12 hours, 12 hours every day. 12 hours of sun, 12 hours of dark. Because we're in the tropics. That's how it works. Now, there's a little bit of variation, especially if you get up towards the northern part of Thailand. Chiang Mai, Nang Khai, Chiang Rai, that area. In June, in the summer, may not even be in June. I'd have to think about exactly what months it would be. But in the summer, the days will be a little bit longer. And in the winter, the days will be a little bit shorter, but not by much. Not by a lot. In America, the difference is a lot. It can be a lot. The days are much longer in the summer. Again, when I say the days, I mean the daylight, the sun. The sun's out a lot longer. So there's a lot more hours for the ground and the air to heat up in America in the summer. So those are the two reasons. It's the moisture and the number of daylight hours. So, let's look at some actual numbers. The highest temperature ever recorded in Thailand was 45.5 degrees Celsius, which was in Tak, and it was actually pretty recently, in April of 2023. It makes sense. A lot of record highs have been recorded in more recent years because of climate change. So that does make sense. But that's the highest temperature in all of Thailand, the whole country. Over half of all of the American states, and there are 50 of them, and I believe it was 27 of them, over half of them have a higher record temperature than Thailand, including a lot of them right along the Canadian border, a lot of them in the north. For example, in Wisconsin, maybe you don't know Wisconsin. Maybe you're not familiar with that state, but it's almost exactly in the middle, east to west. It might be just a tiny bit east. The state west of them might be right in the middle. That would be Minnesota. But Wisconsin's right near there. So it's almost right in the middle, east to west, and it's all the way to the north. It's all the way to the north along the Canadian border. Okay. Its record high temperature is 45.6 degrees Celsius. So it's almost identical. It's only hotter by 0.1 degree. Basically the same. But still, even the same. That's crazy. You're talking about a place that's practically in Canada. Way up north. Again, it's the lower moisture content in the air, makes it easier to heat up the air. And the fact that they have more hours of sunshine to get that heat. And so we actually get hotter in the summer in America than you get in Thailand. Even New York, which you probably think about as a cold state, their record high is 42.2 degrees Celsius. Okay, that is lower than Thailand at least. That is lower than Thailand, but only by 3.3 degrees. That's it. That's not a lot lower. So New York has almost gotten as hot as Thailand. So that's pretty crazy. That's pretty crazy that America can get hotter than Thailand gets. Now, the biggest difference is, first of all, it may not feel quite as bad because humidity can make it feel even worse because your body can't sweat because there's too much moisture in the atmosphere. Or when your body sweats, the sweat doesn't evaporate, it just sticks on you. Evaporating sweat actually cools your body off. So that higher moisture content in the air in Thailand makes it feel worse. So it feels worse in Thailand, even though the temperature's not quite as high. So it may not be quite as bad of a feel, but the actual temperatures are actually higher, can get higher. So that's one thing that I should clarify about it, is that it may not feel worse. The other thing I should clarify about it is that it's not going to last as long. Here in Thailand, it's just hot every day. I guarantee you, that day that it was 45.6 degrees in Wisconsin, probably within 2 or 3 or 4 days, it was probably down into the 30s. Still hot. It was the summer. Yeah, probably still hot, but not anything like that. Probably a good 10 to 15 degrees cooler just a few days later. Okay, but let's look at an example here, though, to see how much it varies. So Thailand's record coldest reading is minus 1.4 degrees Celsius in Sakon Nakhon. That was in 1974. All right, well, honestly, I'm kind of surprised it's even that cold. There are some unofficial records that are even colder than that up in the hills of northwestern Thailand. But this, I don't think, is really in the hills. I'm surprised it ever got that cold. Getting below freezing in the tropics, that's crazy. But it did. That's the record. Minus 1.4 degrees Celsius in Sakon Nakhon in 1974. But in Wisconsin, remember, Wisconsin had a higher record high than Thailand. In Wisconsin, their record cold temperature is minus 48.3 degrees Celsius. That is crazy. And keep in mind, in Thailand, the record high was in a much hotter place than the record cold was. Wisconsin's a big state. It's not that big. So that's crazy. This is over a smaller geographic area. I don't know. Wisconsin's pretty big. It might be almost as big as Thailand. But it's over no bigger of a geographic area. Let's put it that way. It's over no bigger of a geographic area. And that entire range in Thailand is 47 degrees Celsius. In Wisconsin, that range between their record high and their record low is 90.5 degrees Celsius. That's crazy. The difference in variation. And here's another one for you, which is even crazier. This is even weirder. I told you the temperature can also change quickly. I told you that in the first part of our program. Temperature can change fast in America sometimes. The biggest temperature in one day in the U.S. was 57.2 degrees Celsius in Montana, which is far north, in January of 1972. In one day, a location right there in Montana saw a temperature swing larger than Thailand's entire record book, which again, remember, was 47 degrees. This was over 57 degrees as far as the temperature swing in this location in Montana. At 9 a.m. on January 14th of that year, 1972, the temperature was minus 54 degrees Celsius in Montana. And then it rose to, okay, this would be over 100 degrees Celsius. I think it was minus 54 Fahrenheit, excuse me. Sorry, so that's going to be in Fahrenheit. The 57.2 degree range is in Celsius. I mistakenly wrote down the next two numbers in Fahrenheit. So I'm sorry about that. But the minus 54 is going to be it's going to be fairly similar in Celsius because they meet at around 50. So that's probably going to be, they meet at 40 rather, at minus 40. So that's probably around minus 46, minus 47 Celsius on January 14th in the morning. And then by 8 a.m. the next morning, it rose to about 10 degrees Celsius. Again, I wrote it down in Fahrenheit, so I have the wrong number here, but it's 49 Fahrenheit. That would be around 8, 9, 10 Celsius. And we know the range is 57.2. That I did write down in Celsius correctly. So that's crazy. 57 degree temperature swing. Okay? All right, so what even would cause something as crazy as that? Well, because we have mountains in America, which we don't really have big mountains here, the wind, when it comes down a certain side of the mountain, it can cause the air to compress. If you think about blowing up a bicycle tire, sometimes the pump will get hot. Why does the pump get hot? Especially a manual one when you're doing it by hand. So it's not like some electrical, not heat from the electricity. You're doing it by hand. Why does the pump get hot? When you compress air, it gets hotter. So the air coming down the mountain compresses at the bottom of the mountain right where this town is, and it heats up. So that's what happened. They're going to wind shift at this location in the U.S., and the temperature changed by 57 degrees. Crazy in one day. Okay, so the bottom line is that the weather in America is so much crazier. But I have been surprised at how crazy it can kind of be here, too. Can get kind of cool up in the north. We do get tornadoes. Not very often, not very strong, but we do get them. Rainy season has a lot more variation than I expected. So it is a little bit crazy here as well, but it is more crazy in America. And that may sound bad, right? That's terrible. All this wild weather. But sometimes it can be better. It depends on what you like. For example, for me, I more like the warm weather than the cold weather. But I don't like it constantly hot all the time. So in that way, I kind of prefer the American weather. But it's hard to find exactly the right place in America for that. Because in order to get that cool weather, you need to be somewhere kind of up north. But if you go up north too much, it's going to get really cold in the winter. And I don't like it really cold either. Plus, as I pointed out, with these big temperature ranges, they're still going to get hotter there than we even get here in Thailand. So, kind of depends what you like. It kind of depends what you like as far as where the best weather is. I think for me, the best weather that I like is probably more like Thailand, where it's more consistent, but just a little north, where it can get a little cooler. Like northern Thailand is not bad. Maybe even into Laos would be weather that's even nicer for me, where it gets even a little bit cooler. In fact, the northern border of Laos, where it borders China, can actually get snow sometimes. Not very often, but they do get snow in the winter up there. Occasionally. So, sort of central northern Laos is probably like the perfect weather for me. Maybe northern Vietnam, that area. That would be where my perfect weather would be. So it depends on what you like. It's also interesting that you kind of get used to it as well. I think you get used to it when you're young, because I've been here 8 years. I'm still not used to the Thai weather. But I mentioned that because, we get those few cool days in the winter here, and all of the Thai people are wearing coats and sweaters and hats, and they're dressed up like it's ready to snow outside, and it's still 20 degrees Celsius out. For me, that's time to hang out outside in the park with your short sleeve shirt on and your shorts. That's beautiful weather. That's the best weather. So we kind of get used to it. We get used to our weather. And like I said, I think we get used to it when we're young, because I've been here 8 years. I'm still not used to the heat. Okay. So that's kind of the difference in the weather. And I was going to talk in the second part about why we get tropical cyclones so infrequently here in Thailand, but we've already talked about that in the first part. It has to do with the storms having to kind of get around Vietnam and Cambodia, and to do that they have to go so far south that the earth pretty much cannot support a storm there. It can, but only very, very narrowly. The storm would have to just barely miss Cambodia and Vietnam. It would need to be a perfect track, very difficult to do, or it would need to come at Thailand from the other direction, from west of us moving east. And that just generally doesn't happen that often either. It certainly does. Most of these tropical cyclones that Thailand has gotten have been from that direction, have been those type of storms, but they're not common. In fact, we almost got one a couple of years ago, one, or maybe even just last year, one hit Myanmar coming in from that direction. Had it been a little bit more, moving a little bit more to the east, it might have gotten more into Thailand than Myanmar. So there are occasionally storms that will move in that direction, but they're not common. That is not the common direction that storms will move. Storms will usually move from east to west. And so because of that, in order for us to get a direct hit, I'm not talking about getting the leftovers. That happens quite often. A storm moves into Vietnam. A couple of days later, we're getting some rain and breezy conditions here. I'm talking about a direct hit from a tropical cyclone. And yeah, it's hard to do because they have to go south of Vietnam and Cambodia. All right, so that is some interesting information about the weather differences between Thailand and the U.S. and kind of my experience with that. My experience with like the heat here in Thailand and the fact that I don't really like the constant heat. My body is more used to that kind of American weather where it changes a lot. Thank you for joining us for today's An American in Thailand program. Please stay with us and tune back in next week for another interesting episode. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.